It's, what?
Why don't you?
Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York. It is the 21st of March 2006, approximately 1:45 p.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Fred Orshan, born Brooklyn, New York, Brighton Beach.
Mm-hmm. And when, please?
Born November 23rd, 1923.
And I asked you this before, I'll ask you again. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
Elementary school, Manhattan Aviation High School.
Okay. Do you remember where you were and your reaction when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Certainly. I was walking down the street, and the man said, Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and killed thousands of soldiers, Marines, and civilians. And immediately, I wanted to kill anybody that had slain the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
That was my reaction.
Okay. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
Well, I was drafted in the Army. I went through the Army line, and the corporal stamped my papers Army. I yelled out, I don't want to go to the Army. I want to go to the Marines. So this Marine Corps sergeant stood up and asked the corporal for my papers. He said, no, this man is in the Army. So he pulled the papers out of his hand and tore them up. And he sent me through the Marine Corps line. After another 40 minutes, I came out as a Marine.
Why did you want to be a Marine?
Because I knew Marines were going to be in action.
Mm-hmm.
They would be up front, that I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have the most action. So they would be up there killing Japs.
Okay. When did you enter the service? You don't have to have the exact date.
April
1940.
April 1943.
Okay. Where did you enter the service?
Paris Island.
Okay. Now, how long were you on Paris Island? At Paris
3 months.
Island? 3 months, okay. What was your training like?
It wasn't difficult at all, because I was always powerful. In the Marine Corps, I was captain of the wrestling team in my air wing. I've always felt I was as strong as an ox.
Mm-hmm.
And you are as strong as you feel you are. Even today at 83, I could beat anybody.
I thought you told me it was rigorous, though.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel.
Okay. Now, is this the first time you were away from home?
Yes,
How did you feel about that?
that didn't bother me.
Okay. After you left Paris Island, where did you go?
Well, in Paris Island, one thing that stands out in my mind, that on the rifle range, I shot expert. And the general pinned the medal on me. There was 800 Marines, and there were only 6 experts. And they asked me if I would remain there to train inductees, and that my rank would just jump. But I said, no, I want to kill Jets. That's what I came for. So I took a test, and of course I had the aviation background, so I was put into the Marine Air Corps. And I knew everything about engines and airplanes. So they classified me as engine mechanic. Then when I went to Paris Island, I wasn't going overseas. So I went into the captain, I said, what's going on? He said, we don't send engine mechanics overseas. They stay here to work on engines. So what do I have to do to go overseas? He said, if I change your classification to airplane mechanic, we could send you. So that's what I did. 3 days later, I found myself on a train heading to California. And you can't imagine how happy I was. Then I went to the Mariana Islands and a number of other islands. And as we went to the islands, I noticed there wasn't any action. They said, you don't have any action when you're in the Air Corps. You fix planes. The pilots have the actions. Only the line company goes in. So I was in a problem. Then I found out that Japs hide in the mountains, underneath the ground. So I was happy then. So I went into the caves, and that's where I started to kill Japs. The first one I killed was on Okinawa. He was a samurai warrior, because he had a samurai sword. I still have that samurai sword. He was running toward me, and there was a woman right in front of him. They called them gooks, the natives on the islands. And she was running toward me. She had her breast cut off. He had it in his mouth. Her nipple was sticking out. It took 2 seconds. He came right at me. The knife was full of blood. He was a big son of a bitch. I had my machete in my hand. I chopped off his head. That was the first Jap I ever killed.
Now you were,
I looked for the trouble.
Fred, why don't you let him ask you?
Yeah.
that's okay. You were a mechanic, but you went out into the
Caves.
caves looking.
Well, I wasn't going on the beaches. I had to find them.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you carry any weapons besides the machete?
No.
Didn't carry any sidearms or anything?
No, after that I had, now I went in caves before on other islands one time. I went in without anything. And I realized that was stupid. Suppose I saw a Jap with a gun or a knife. So after that, I made sure I had a machete
Didn't you have grenades?
and a hand grenade and hand grenades on my belt. Then I was set. And after I came to a cave, and I pretty well by that time knew how they made their caves. They put a whole bunch of bushes in front. And they even had an indication with a small red thing, I guess, so the other Japs would know where the caves are. When I came back after the war, I found out that there was as many as 20,000 Japanese soldiers in some of the caves. That was in books. Just a couple of years ago, they found Japanese soldiers in caves. It was in all the papers. Of course, they're all in their 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in my 80s.
Now, basically, your duties then were, your assignment for the Marine Corps, though, was to work on planes and
Right.
engine repairs and so on. What planes did you work on? All of them? or-
FOUs and SBDs. Now the SBDs had wood alcohol in their wings. 2 of our mechanics drank the wood alcohol. They were told they could die.
Mhm.
One went blind in one eye, and one went blind in both. And they were all our friends. We were all the same age. The pilots and the mechanics, they were all the same age. We were all 19, 20 years old.
Mhm.
And on one of the islands, I was sitting cleaning out a rifle with the ramrod. And my buddy was doing the same thing on his cot. All of a sudden, the bullet goes off. Went right through his chin and through his head. He came to me from Brighton Beach. So I knew him, you know, all through the war. I wanted to call his mother, you know, but the sergeant said, no, it's my job. So he took care of it.
When you saw combat service, was the first time was on Okinawa?
No, I looked for trouble
Yeah.
on the other islands.
Okay.
I was a son of a bitch. I always looked for trouble.
Were you ever injured or wounded?
Never. The only time I was wounded in my life was when I broke my finger in a football game and my shoulder.
Did you ever have any illnesses on the islands at all?
I played every sport except soccer and lacrosse, but we never played that.
Yeah, yeah. What was your daily life like as an engine repairman? What kind of structures did you live in? Did you live in tents or
Tents.
barracks?
Tents.
What was
The
daily
islands
life?
Are all tents, and we built our foxholes 2 feet from the tent. So when planes came over, we just rolled over. And when it rained for a week, we had bugs and all kind of things in that foxhole, all full of mud. Sometimes we had to use a straw to breathe. We woke up in the morning and the mud was caked on us. We got up and we jumped into the ocean.
Did you have any problems with tropical diseases? Or
Never.
No.
Never.
What were
I
the?
never had any trouble with the squid and the octopus and the sharks, because they never bothered you. You didn't bother them, and they didn't bother you.
What were some of the examples of repairs that you had to do on the planes, for example?
It was mainly taking care of the gas tank,
Mhm.
that they had enough gas to go and come back.
There wasn't a lot of maintenance on them then?
So you became basically a fuel handler?
And fixing some of the parts.
Uh-huh.
If something broke, we always had extras, but that was very easy for me. I knew inside out of airplanes and engines. In high school, I worked on lathes, milling machines, power hacksaws. I knew everything. So when I got to Paris Island, they wanted to send me to school. They said I would go up in rank, you know, you go to school, study being a private, you'll come out a sergeant. I didn't think I needed it, but I think I did the wrong thing. I made a lot of mistakes. Because if I would have gone to school, not that I wanted to be promoted, but I would have gotten a promotion and then would have learned more about the SBDs and F4Us.
What unit were you assigned to?
Second Air Wing. But they were connected, you know, with the Army and, because, you know, the Marine Air Corps was small. So we were always assigned to a big bomber squadron, and it was always the Army, because they had just tremendous planes. We didn't have tremendous, so we had fighter planes.
Did you ever work on any of the bombers that the Marine Corps had?
We didn't have
just-
bombers.
We've interviewed some that were on
Yeah.
B-25s.
I think so.
Yeah.
We never had.
I was just
bombers.
wondering if your unit probably was strictly fighters.
All fighters. SBDs,
Yeah.
mainly in the States. The F4Us were overseas.
Were there any experiences that you thought were funny or inspirational
Well,
that kind of stand out to you?
I was supposed to go up, no, you got flight pay if you flew a certain amount of times every month. Well, I was in the mess hall. You could eat as much as you want, but you had to eat everything you took. So I took a big plate of bacon, about 30 pieces. And the sergeant standing over me, he said, "You can eat all that?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm not going to eat the fat. I don't eat fat." He stood watching me for an hour and a half as I cut every piece of fat off the bacon. And when I got to the airport, my plane was starting up already. So I couldn't get my flight. But that didn't matter. You take it a different day. So these 4 pilots who were going up went up, and only 3 came back. The pilot that went up with me didn't come back. And she remembers, because we're married 58 years. I rode home, and I told my family, I told Iris what happened. I didn't eat for 3 weeks. Not only because it saved my life, but these pilots were our friends. What happens, he went into the dive, never pulled out. He went 4 foot into the ground. So there were plenty of times I should have been dead.
Are there any people that you served with that stand out, that you recall more than others?
Yes, but, you know, I don't like to mention names
Okay.
because I had that backfire. Let me tell you one story. I taught mentally retarded kids for 50 years after I got out of the Marines. I always liked to work with people who are unfortunate. And I had this special class in Glen Cove. I taught 48 years in Glen Cove, special class. And this little 9-year-old cut a seat with a chisel. We always had tools in our room. That's what we made. We made projects. So I thought I should tell his mother. And I always made home visits, because I felt if you see what's going on in the home, where they sleep, what they eat, how they live, you know the kid better. So for 48 years, I made home visits. No one else did in the school. So,
Well, I'm sorry.
so
Okay.
I go home, I go over, she told me to come down anytime. I come down there, and his sister comes out, she was a high school girl, I knew the family, takes me by the hand and starts to pull me in the room. I go into the room, the girls are half naked, and there's a whole bunch of older men standing there. So I knew she was running a prostitution house. So I called her by her name, and she dropped my hand and ran out, and the mother came back with this boy, and she's slamming him all over the place. She said, "What did he do now?" I said, "He didn't do anything. I can't tell you what a nice job he's doing. This kid had more problems than cutting a seat."
So you didn't tell them about me?
Let me tell you what happened. 2 weeks ago, I go in to bring my car in for a check in a local place, you know, where I bought the car. I mentioned the story to the girl who was checking us in. I was just sitting right next to me. And she says, I mentioned Wayne, his name. She says, "Wayne Tillman? That's his name." She said, "I know him. I live in Glen Cove. He's 17. And he's a problem." I knew he was a problem. So I cut out all the names from my book. And that happened on another occasion.
You just said the kid's
Let me
name.
just tell you
don't
one
wanna say
more.
Yeah.
There was a kid Mandrone, Salvatore Mandrone. His father was a mafia, because he was in charge of all the trucks, the garbage trucks, you know. Big Italian guy, powerful. And he was pretty big too. He was bigger than I was. I'm teaching these 12 kids, and they didn't have room for a class. So they put my class at the end of the hall and put a door. So all we had was 2 rows of seats and no room to go anyplace, just the center aisle.
Mhm.
I'm standing in front of my desk, and this kid jumps up with a knife and comes straight at me. He was bigger than me, but he wasn't stronger. I slammed the knife, and I did judo and everything. I slammed the knife out of his hand. I slammed him in the face. His face started to bleed. I grabbed him by the hair and dragged him into the principal's office and threw him down. And I said, "He's yours now." And I told him what happened. The principal beat the hell out of him. And then he calls his father. He was a monster. He beat him up, and the kid was out cold. They dragged him out. I never had trouble with that kid again. He was my monitor after that. Now listen what happens. A few years later, in camp, we were camp counselors for a long time, in Camp Shawanda. I'll tell you about Camp Shawanda. I brought up Sandy Koufax.
Fred, he doesn't want to know all that stuff.
Anyway,
You tell
We'll let him finish this one.
let me just finish this one. So I'm in my cousin's hospital. He's an osteopath. He's part owner of a hospital in Queens, Queensboro Hospital. And so I had this attack in camp. I went to the Kingston Hospital, and after I got out in about 5 days, and they sent me back to the camp, and they said they can't operate now because it's inflamed. I'll have to wait until inflammation goes down. So I waited about a month. Then I went into the hospital, and they operated on me. And it was dirty instruments. All the stitches popped out. Pus was all over me. I don't know how I didn't die. I was there for 3.5 weeks. You remember? So, but she remembers all this. And what happens, I'm laying in the bed, and right next to me is this kid, Salvatore Mandrone. This is 10 years later. Of course, I recognized him, he recognized me, but we never said anything. So that's why I don't use names in my
Go
book.
on now, all right?
All right?
We're going back to Okinawa.
Let's
Okay.
go on with what he came.
Okinawa.
Here.
Were you there during the typhoon?
There was a typhoon all the time. There was a typhoon all the time.
Mm-hmm.
If there wasn't a typhoon, the Kamikaze planes would
I was going to ask about that next.
Let him
Did you
answer.
witness any of the Kamikaze attacks?
on the ship. On the ship.
Yes, I mean, did you see them
When
on
we were
the...
going to Okinawa,
Mhm.
the same time that Bush was a Navy pilot.
Mhm.
He might have the same story.
Mhm.
There was a sky full of kamikaze planes. The Navy gunners shot down 3. And you know why? They couldn't fly. They were only taught how to take off.
Right.
And one of them ejected, and we captured him in the water. He was a 15-year-old kid.
Hmm.
We put him in a cell. The next day, when we went back, when the sailors went back to look at the cell, he was hanging. He hung himself.
Did you, where did you go after Okinawa?
Oh, then on Okinawa, we were all packed up to go into Japan.
Mhm.
And the 2 atomic bombs were dropped, Nagasaki and
What was
Hiroshima.
your reaction when you heard about them?
We were great. We didn't have to go in.
Mhm.
They told us 1 million Marines will get killed if we went in.
Mhm.
And we were ready, we were all packed. So we unpacked and figured we're going home. No way. It took Hirohito 6 days before he surrendered, after the atomic bombs.
Mm-hmm.
Then finally we went toward Okinawa. And we went up to the harbor,
Not Okinawa, you mean Japan.
Japan.
Japan,
Mm-hmm.
at Yokosuka, at Yokosuka Air Base. And while we were sitting there, the captain announced that we're going home. I didn't want to go home after coming all that way without stepping foot on Japan.
Mhm.
So I talked two guys, two Marines, into going with me. I gave them an extra carton of cigarettes. They all smoked.
You mean the Japanese and other...
No, our guys to
Mhm.
go with me,
Oh.
because they all smoked,
Mhm.
and I had a satchel full of a lockbox we had. I had it full of cigarettes,
Mhm.
cartons of cigarettes, and I never smoked in my life. So, and I took two cartons, and I went down with them. We had throw the garbage out. That was very close to the water. So I waved the cartons, and there were fishing boats out. There were small boats.
Mhm.
There were two guys, two chaps in the fishing boat. They came over when they saw the cartons. I gave them a carton of cigarettes. Of course, they couldn't understand what we were saying. We didn't know what they were saying. But they took us to shore. When we got to shore, no one was there. As soon as we got to shore, everybody shut their windows and shutters, because they were told that in order to be a Marine, you had to kill either your mother or your father. So they were really scared of the Marines.
Do you remember hearing about the death of President Roosevelt?
Sure.
What was your reaction to that?
I didn't like him.
Mhm.
Mainly because when a boat came from Germany, got away with all Jews, and I'm Jewish, and they were coming looking for haven in America. He knew that if he sent them back, they would get killed. And he sent them back. And they were all killed. I could never stand them. Not because I was Jewish.
Mhm.
He did that to anybody.
Mhm. When did you? No, you said you were on a base when George Bush was there.
No,
Were
no, he was escorting
Oh,
us.
escorting.
His ship,
Mhm.
the Intrepid. The
Mhm.
Intrepid
Oh yeah,
was
that's right.
escort.
Okay. Okay, he was in
So
the
I knew
Intrepid
that
while
he
you
was
were.
there.
Uh-huh.
I didn't find that out, of course,
Right.
till after the
later.
war.
Mhm.
I'm a member of the Intrepid. I contribute there every year. So when I went there, I saw a sign on one of the planes that said George Bush. But that wasn't the plane that he flew,
Right.
because he was shot down
Yes.
and wounded. But I guess that was the plane they gave him afterwards.
When did you return to the States?
In March, didn't you? 46?
Yeah, in March '46, I had a lot of experience with geisha girls,
You
let me
didn't
tell you.
ask you that.
Because that was at Okinawa. That was in Japan.
Okay, when were you discharged?
I was discharged in March '46.
Okay.
So I had 3 years in the Marines. And the good thing about it is each 4 months was considered a term. So at that 36 months, I went through my bachelor's and master's degree.
Oh,
Okay,
My
so I was
bachelor.
going to ask you, you used the GI Bill then?
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
In fact, when I was at Columbia, there were 4 other jobs that I was applying for, city jobs.
Mhm.
So instead of taking the required 16 credits, you couldn't take more at Columbia. I was going to 4 different schools, remember? To take courses. I was carrying 32 credits. I had a tough time. The hardest course was statistics at City College. That was rough. I'll tell you how I passed that.
Fred, why don't you let him ask
Let me
the
tell you how I
questions?
passed that.
Fred,
Okay, you can tell us that story.
Fred.
I passed that. I knew I wasn't going to pass the test.
Uh-huh.
So they were giving the professor was giving the test on a Tuesday and Friday. He was teaching that course for 20 years. Of course, he never gave the same test on both days. But I didn't know what to do. So I went on Tuesday. You remember that? And I copied the test on the board. I knew that wasn't going to be the test, but I had to do something.
You think they really weren't going to put
And
that?
don't you think he gave that test? He didn't have time to make up a new one. So when he puts the test on the board, I was smiling. He said, "Orshan, you have the test." I said, "Right." He said, "You came on Tuesday?" I said, "Yes."
Did you
Well, he couldn't
ever,
do anything. I passed the course.
did you ever use the 5220 club?
Sure. Sure.
Okay.
The canteen in Times Square, we always went. We used to dance.
Did you ever
Look,
see
I lived in Brighton Beach. I wasn't far from any of that.
Did you ever see any USO shows while you were in the service?
Sure.
Did you see any name stars at all, or?
Yeah, we saw Bob Hope. Oh, a whole bunch of singers. But
Did you-
that didn't impress me.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't interested in that. I was only interested in killing Japs. That was my mindset.
But he wants to know if the USO, if those shows were...
Oh yeah, USO was nice.
They helped.
They gave you coffee and any donuts and everything. It was on Times Square.
Did you ever join any veterans organizations?
No,
Never did. Okay,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
I should have.
Did you ever,
I'll tell you why I didn't. I never had time. After I went to college, I started teaching. Taught 1 year, 5th grade, and then my superintendent, let me tell you how I got the job. I went to 3 different school systems, and they tied me down because I had a bachelor's degree, a master's, and 15 credits more. And they would have to give me a very big salary. And I never had any experience teaching. So they tied me down. Then the 4th one, my friend Herm Parmet, who was a history professor he later became a history professor at Queensborough College. And his main job was to write books. So he wrote books about a lot of the presidents. And he visited every president and spent a few weeks with them before he wrote. Now, he's still alive. He lives, we see him often. He lives right off the Taconic on Hillcrest, Hillside. Right now he's in Florida. Anyway, he told me about a job when he was working in West Babylon. And it was about an hour and a half ride from Brighton Beach. And all the way I was cursing. I was saying to myself, they don't appreciate my service to the country. No one wants to give me a job because they have to pay me too much. I walked in that office and I was ready to tear into this Helmut Peterson. He says to me, "You're a Marine." Looks at me. He says, "So was I." He says, "You weren't an officer, were you?" I said, "No." He says, "If you were, I'd throw you out of here. I hate officers." He says, "The job is yours." Didn't even ask me what I came for. He would have given me the job if I never went to college. So I was coming in for a 5th grade job. I was very happy to get anything. So he gave me a 5th grade job. And in the middle of the year, he wanted to start a special class. He was the only guy that could do it as you. He knew I was a wrestler in the Marines, I was strong, and at that time, who did they put in special classes? The retarded, autistic, kids that attack teachers with knives and guns. Everybody that the teachers couldn't handle went into special class. I had 21 kids like that. In the middle of the year, the State Department sent someone down, and they said, you can't keep a class like this. They was going to start to separate the retarded from the disturbed and so on. So I only taught that there 1 year. And then I left for more money, and it was closer. I went to Elmont in the junior high where I had that kid Mondrone.
Did you,
Oh, and then a few years later, I left for Glen Cove. They were paying even higher. And that's where I was invited by President Kennedy to go to the White House. He had, in 1962, we went to the White House. Iris went, and my 2 kids. And Evelyn Lincoln was his private secretary. She greeted us and accepted the cart, because he had a retarded sister, Rosemary. He was touched by it. That's why he invited me.
Would you let him ask the questions? if
We
he
just
wants
have 2
to
left.
ask you? Stop,
Okay, go
stop.
ahead. I could talk over
But-
there.
Yeah, I see
Tell
that.
me.
Did you have any, did you stay in contact with anyone that was in service with you ever?
Just one for a couple of years, but then we lost contact.
Okay. How do you think your time in the service changed or had an effect on your life?
I was a different person.
In what ways?
Well, the way I felt about people. At that time, I only wanted to kill Japs. When I came out, and I was teaching retarded children for 50 years, my whole outlook changed. Because I had all kinds of kids, Japanese, German, and so on, and they were all respectful. So why should I blame their grandfathers? Why should I blame these kids for what their grandfathers did? So I don't hate anybody now. But it took a long time.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
One other thing. Well, this is all in my book. It's going to be terrific. Plus more. Going to the White House and
After this
everything
story,
else.
I'm leaving.
All right.
Okay?
All right.
They want to get a...
We'll leave it
all right?
like that.
Okay, come.
We'll leave it
Very
there.
nice
All right,
meeting you.
well, thank you
All
very
right?
much.
All right.
I'm very